Welcome back to the Ash and Stone channel, and the second video in this series of Oathmark video guides. My name is Chris, and today we'll cover the basic unit types and how to build kingdoms and armies. As I mentioned in the beginner's guide, pre-made army lists aren't really a thing in Oathmark. There's two main ways of putting together an army for a game. If you're playing a one-off game, you can just take one of the existing terrain lists, which we'll have a look at later on in the video, build an army, and you're set. But where the rule set really shines is where you build your own kingdom. This allows you to take any unit at all in the game. Want a stalwart line of dwarves and a thunderous charge of human heavy cavalry? Can do. Want elite elven archers shooting over an unyielding line of revenants? Sure. Want ogres, a giant, and evil dwarf warriors backed up by a swarm of goblins? Not a problem. Oathmark is all about making it your own and creating your own stories with your own kingdom. But let's start with a quick look into the races available and then an overview on the common unit types so you've got an idea of what you can field. The list won't be exhaustive, but it will give you an idea of the basic troop types and what makes them special. The various fantasy races are pretty much what you would expect and are heavily inspired by Tolkien and European mythology. Dwarves are reliable and durable, though slow and a little pricey. Humans are your base level, good enough at everything and quite capable of getting the job done. Elves are extremely reliable and skilled, though rather expensive to field. Goblins are cheap, numerous and savage when they initiate the fight, though weaker when on the defensive, and are rather unreliable. Orcs are strong, brutal on the charge, though also quite unreliable in a pinch. The undead are unyielding and resistant to arrows, though uncaring of their unlives. On to the common units, and we'll start with infantry. The basic troop type is the soldier. These guys wield a one-handed weapon and shield, giving them the shielding 1 special rule. Shielding increases the durability of the unit. When being shot at in the front or flank, you can force your opponent to reduce the number of combat dice they roll by your shielding level, in this case 1 to a minimum of 1. Additionally, when fighting an opponent in combat to the front, you can choose to sacrifice a number of your combat dice up to your shielding value to force your opponent to reduce the number of combat dice they roll by the same amount, to a minimum of 1. Although this option is only available if you're the defending unit. Next up, we have spearmen. Spearmen have a spear and shield, making them more resistant to enemies with the charge special rule. They have shielding 1, same as the soldiers, but also have brace. If a unit with the charge special rule moves into contact with a unit that has brace, the moving unit loses 1 level of charge. Archers. These guys are your basic ranged troops that come equipped with a bow and the fire over special rule. Fire over means that if the shooting unit is within 3 inches of a friendly unit that is not large or enormous, they can draw a line of sight through that friendly unit as if it weren't there, allowing them to shoot over a unit in front of them. For heavy infantry, we start with the warriors. Warriors are similar to soldiers, having the shielding 1 rule, but they are also more heavily armoured, making them more durable. Line breakers are the other heavy infantry type, and these guys come equipped with heavy armour and 2-handed weapons, giving them some extra punch in melee combat. Light infantry covers the various militia types. These vary between the races, from the hard-hitting 2-handed weapon-wielding dwarf militia, to the pathetic wretches that are goblin slaves, to the nimble elf path guard who ignore rough ground. Then there are rangers with the aimed fire rule. These guys can pick any target in range that they can see to shoot at, rather than having to shoot at the closest target like regular archers. Excellent for picking out particular units or models. Humans, elves, goblins and the undead have access to cavalry. These fast and hard-hitting units tend to have the charge 2 or 3 rule, increasing their fight value by the indicated amount when they move into contact with an enemy unit, making them devastating on the charge. The undead share a couple of special rules that make them unique compared to the other races. Undead makes them automatically pass morale tests and resistant to arrows shot from bows, and uncaring means they don't have a sense of self-preservation. They will not shield and suffer additional losses in combat instead of making morale tests as they take casualties. In addition to these basic unit types, there are characters, artillery and monsters. The rules for these units will be covered in the next guide video, where I'll go deeper into the basics and cover the more advanced rules. But as a quick intro, characters cover roles such as commanders, spellcasters and mighty champions. Artillery includes ballistas and catapults. And there is a large list of monsters with classics like giants and dragons, and also more obscure types like the Indrik, Surma or the poisonous Naka. Now that you've had a brief look at the basic unit types, let's go through how to build your kingdom. It's a pretty straightforward system and it gives you great flexibility as to what units and models you field during a game. You can find a kingdom sheet to map out your kingdom, either copied from the back of the book, downloaded from the Osprey Games website, or my favourite way is to use the Army Builder, created by Daniel Loblin. It's absolutely brilliant. Link for all of these in the description below. At the top of the sheet is room for naming your kingdom and its current ruler. You don't have to give them names, but it adds a lot more personality and flavour if you do. Fighting for the Kingdom of Sylvindia or the Doom Marsh Collective makes your game sound way more epic without even rolling a die. Your kingdom is made up of different zones that you fill with terrain that will give you access to the units you field. The terrain is chosen from terrain lists. In the Oathmark rulebook there are 4 basic terrain lists: Dwarf, Human, Elf, and then Goblin and Orc. There's also an unaligned terrain list that's not specific to any others. The Oathbreakers supplement adds a further terrain list for the undead, and you can find terrain lists on the Osprey Games website to add halflings to your kingdom. The first thing you'll have to decide is what your capital is going to be. There are 5 in the rulebook, choosing from Dwarf, Human, Elf, Goblin or Orc. Or you can choose one of the 2 undead types in the Oathbreakers supplement. Your capital goes in the central zone of the chart and will determine the race of your king and royal family and give you access to some characters and basic troop types. Because any kingdom can include any terrain type, this choice won't stop you from taking any other types of terrain, though you can only have one capital. In this example, let's take a dwarf city. Next up, we're going to pick 2 types of terrain for the 2 zones around the capital. The terrain lists in the rulebook have a number in brackets next to the terrain type. Because we have picked a dwarf city as our capital, we can put any of the terrain types in the dwarf terrain list with a 2 or less next to them into these 2 zones. If we want to pick from any of the other terrain lists, we can pick anything with a 1 in the brackets. So that means we can take a dwarf city, forges, mountain passes, lumberyards, or a city from one of the other terrain lists into our 2 Zone 2 slots. Note that when you pick a city outside of your capital region, it does not include a king or prince, only your capital has those. Then we go on to the next ring out, the 3 slots of Zone 3. With much the same process, any terrain from the dwarf terrain list with a 3 or less, or any terrain from any of the other lists with a 2 or less. Finally, we can fill in any of the 4 slots in Zone 4 with any terrain type we like. The outer Zone 5 is left empty and can be filled when playing with the campaign rules, allowing you to grow your kingdom as you play through military expeditions and combat rival kingdoms. So, not too bad, that's your kingdom built. Daniel Loblin's Army Builder then automatically gives you a list of the units available for you to build your army out of. If you've done it by hand, then it can be a good idea to make a list of your available units to save from having to refer back to the book so much. Now that you have picked out a terrain list, or even better, built your own kingdom, you can put together an army. First up, you and your opponent have to decide on a point value for the game, or a specific scenario may dictate that to you. There are some examples in the book for what you might choose. To give you an idea, many of the battles shown on this channel are 750 to 1500 points, because smaller battles are easier to edit. You then choose units and models, adding up the point value for each model until you have reached the point limit decided upon. For example, if we want to put together a small 500 point force, the kind of thing you might put together from a single box of figures and a metal character, we might make the following: a dwarf spellcaster for 50 points, This could be a wizard, a rune crafter, a blood mage, a storm caller, however you want to flavour it. Spellcaster is deliberately vague for that reason. 2 units of 10 dwarf soldiers, 150 points each, and a unit of 10 dwarf archers, 150 points, giving us 500 total. We might match that up against a goblin captain, a goblin champion, a goblin spellcaster, 2 units of 9 goblin spearmen, both leaving room for a character in the front, and 10 goblin archers, giving us a total just shy of 500. Once again made from 1 box of plastic figures and a single metal character pack. There are some limits to keep in mind though. Your characters are limited by the terrain in your kingdom. For example, if you have a dwarf city, you may only include 1 dwarf champion. If you want more than 1, you have to have either a second dwarf city in your kingdom, or include another terrain type such as forges to get access to a second dwarf champion. Additionally, your army may never include more than 4 units of the same type. So you can have 4 units of human spearmen, and 4 units of dwarf spearmen, up to 20 models each, but you could not have 5 units of human spearmen in one army. Hopefully that's all clear as mud. As I mentioned earlier, I'll be going deeper into the basic rules and covering the advanced rules in the next video guide. So until then, thank you very much for watching, and we will see you next time. Cheers!